is the 2022 Kia EV6, and it's a fully electric crossover. The electric crossover world is heating up, and this is Kia's entrant, the EV6, with horsepower ranging from about 170 to just under 600. And today, I'm going to review it. Before I get started, be sure to check out Cars and Bids, which is my enthusiast car auction website for cool cars from the modern era, now with free listings. You can list your car for free and auction it on Cars and Bids. And you should, because we've had some fantastic sales recently on Cars and Bids, including this Nissan POW modified, very cool, sold for just over $14,000. This BMW Z8 one owner sold for over $150,000. And this fantastic Nissan GTR brought over $81,000. If you're looking to buy or sell a cool enthusiast car from the modern era, Cars and Bids is the place to do it. Daily auctions, great selection. Check it out at carsandbids.com. So let's talk EV6. Like I said, Kia's electric crossover, and they're offering it in a few different flavors. Rear-wheel drive models will have up to 225 horsepower and up to 310 miles of range. All-wheel drive models like this one have about 320 horsepower and up to 275 miles of range. And a high-performance GT model is coming in the future with almost 600 horsepower. The EV6 is based on the Hyundai Ioniq 5, which has gotten rave reviews for its retro futuristic design. The EV6 is more traditional, but still very modern. Now, pricing hasn't yet been announced for the EV6, but based on the Ioniq 5's pricing, I figure this will probably start in the mid $40,000 range. And today, I'm going to show you what it's all about. First, I'll take you on a tour of the EV6 and show you all of its quirks and features. Then I'll get it out on the road and see how it drives, and then I'll give it a DOUGSCORE. All right, I'm going to start the quirks and features of the EV6, the interior, which is an interesting one. It has some great benefits and cool features and some pretty clear disappointments, and I'll show you all of that. But I want to start with just how futuristic it is in here. If you're looking for an interior that totally stands out from a normal car, that's this. And it's obvious the moment you climb inside and go to start the EV6, where you have the starter button mounted in the center console facing the driver below this like aluminum trim piece in the middle. Very interesting, very different from what you get in most cars. And that continues when you go to put it in gear. The gear selector is a dial. You can see here, you twist it over to the right for drive and then D lights up at the top, or you twist it to the left for reverse, same deal, and neutral is in the middle. And you can see park is a button in the center of this dial in order to put it in park. Very futuristic controls here in the center, and that even includes the heated seats. These buttons up here are actually capacitive touch controls for heated seats, cooled seats, and the heated steering wheel placed up here at the top of the center console, and not traditional buttons, but instead little capacitive touch pads to turn on these items. Also futuristic in this interior is the trim and some of the general style of this interior. For instance, the center console lid, you can see, has these kind of strange lines on it, unusual coloring, unusual angled lines, strange design, and that's carried over to the dashboard. You can see here the same sort of angled lines and unusual coloring on the dashboard, trying to look different and interesting, because this, being an electric car, is different and interesting. But in the world of dashboard trim, probably the most interesting item is this. You can see this blue line over on the passenger side then becomes like many different blue angled lines when it gets below the center climate vents. Oddly, that isn't just a trim piece, it's actually an LED. You can see it kind of flickering on the camera, and when you turn the car off, that turns off completely. Now, disappointingly, it doesn't seem like you can change the color of this LED. You're stuck with blue, but it's a light and not just trim. And I'm not exactly sure why it goes from a line to many blue lines, but that's what it does, because this interior is kind of weird. But nothing in this interior is as futuristic And frankly is kind of disappointing to use as the climate control volume control situation. All right, so I'm driving this thing along and I'm trying to change the stereo volume and I can't find where it is except for the control on the steering wheel like most cars have. And I'm looking around and I'm looking around, I can't find it. Well, the climate controls are on this little panel here in the center. They are electronic, not traditional buttons. You can see it's like an electronic panel in order to adjust the climate controls, which is fine. Not really my favorite because it means that the touch point for some of the controls is smaller than it would be with regular buttons, but it's the same basic idea in the same basic place, so it's fine. Futuristic car gets electronic climate controls, I get it. But then we go back to the volume control. If you press this little arrow on the climate controls, the entire electronic panel switches, and now it's your stereo and infotainment controls, and suddenly the climate control dials have become your volume dial over on the left side and your radio tuner over on the right side. And yes, that means you have to choose whether you want your climate controls displayed in the center or your radio and infotainment controls. You can only pick one at a time. Now, this is quite annoying in practice because you're choosing between having your next track, previous track buttons and your volume button, or having your climate control, temperature, and fan speed. All are very commonly used features, but you can't see them or use them at once. You have to pick which one you want displayed at any given time. This also means that your infotainment system shortcuts are hidden while you have the climate control menu on. You can see here, tap these buttons to go directly to various parts of the infotainment screen, but they're on the climate control pad. So if your climate controls are up, you can't do those shortcuts. Definitely not the best design in terms of usability. And since I'm complaining about the tech in this car, a couple of other complaints I have. For one, let's talk gauge cluster. It is baffling to me that Kia gauge clusters still cannot show the song and music you're listening to like every other vehicle on the planet can. You don't have that choice in the gauge cluster. You can see I'm cycling through all the items here and none show the music. And that's especially annoying in this car because it's a chore to figure out just what you're currently listening to. It's not displayed on your gauge cluster, and you don't have a radio shortcut on the infotainment system because that's hidden by the climate control. So it's like 2 button presses just to figure out what song is currently playing, which is just not really all that good. However, with all that said, complaints over about the technology, the rest of this tech is actually pretty good. And I want to start back with that gauge cluster screen. I find it to be fantastically cool and futuristic. The center panel does show you information, not as much as I would want, but it's there. But the other 2 panels are particularly cool. The one on the left is the speedometer, and it shows your speed with these like red lines that increase as you accelerate. Over on the right, this panel shows your power or your charging, depending on whether you're accelerating or braking using regenerative braking. And you can see it's shown in red and blue, and that is also a pretty cool feature. And it's a pretty cool way to display this stuff in these screens. And of course, the gauge cluster screen has one of my very favorite features in any modern car, and that would be the blind spot camera system, where you put on your turn signal and it shows you what is in your blind spot to whichever side you've signaled, which is tremendously useful when you're making lane changes or passing or on the highway. I really love that feature, and it's pretty much only in Hyundai and Kia models. And as for the center screen, aside from the whole situation with the climate controls, I really do like a lot of stuff about this infotainment system. For one, it is a large screen that can display a lot of information at once, which is nice, and it's tremendously responsive to the touch. It's pretty intuitive to navigate, and sensitive, does exactly what you want it to, pretty much. I also like a few features in this screen, like for instance the EV app. You pop into here and you can see your range and some cool graphics displaying everything, and I especially like that it shows you your current range plus your theoretical range if you turned off some of the stuff that's stealing range, in this case the climate control. That is a pretty neat feature and a nice way to display it. I also like a few other displays in the screen. For instance, the radio station you can see is shown in this like old school radio looking thing. I love how that looks, and I also love the sound this makes when you type stuff into it, like for instance a navigation destination. Take a listen. Very cool, very modern, and it does seem like this infotainment system is more fun than other ones. Although it's also very functional. There are some cool features in here, like this around view camera system you can see here that shows basically all around the car, and you can adjust exactly where you want it positioned. That's something I usually see on much higher end cars than this. I'm surprised to see it here in like the high 40s, low 50s for this car, and that is a really, really cool feature, and it's nice to have. I also love that this infotainment system has quiet mode. You can turn that on and it mutes the rear speakers but just keeps the front speakers on, so you can listen to music while your kids fall asleep. Obviously all cars have this, but you have to go into some setting and turn down the speakers and position the stereo. This, it's just the push of one button on the screen, and it's a cool feature. But anyway, next up, onto some other nice and quirky touches throughout this interior. I want to start with the seats, which are not made of leather but rather Alcantara in the center, as you can see, and they have kind of interesting colors, some contrast stitching, white accents. They look a little sporty, which makes sense since this is the Sporty GT line model. I also like the fact that you have this center console up here, everything is within easy reach, but below that there is another center console, a lower one, and there's a lot of storage in between, which is a cool touch. Also in this lower center console, you have 4 different USB ports, which is pretty nice. 1 USB-A, 2 USB-C, and a 12-volt cigarette lighter style port, and that's all great to have right in front for easy access from driver and passenger. One other rather unusual item in this interior is the steering wheel, which has just one spoke going across flat. Kind of interesting and unusual compared to other steering wheels, but probably the most interesting parts, for one, the drive mode button is at the bottom of the steering wheel, kind of sticking off. You can see it here, and you can switch between sort of a normal, a sport, and an eco mode by pressing this. You also have paddles on this steering wheel, which is a neat trick since this car has no transmission with gears. The paddles control regen braking. So if you pull back on the left paddle, it gives you more regen. When you're slowing down, the car automatically slows down faster and captures more energy, and the paddle on the right lessens the regen braking. And you can kind of dial that depending on what you want using the paddles. And next up, we move on to the back seat in the EV6, which is frankly one of this car's greatest benefits. I say that because the EV6 is only about as long as a Honda CR-V, only a couple inches longer, but the back seat is absolutely massive. This car does a great job with packaging. You have fantastic legroom, knee room. I have really a lot of space back here as a tall adult in the back seat, and somehow you even have good headroom, which is a neat trick because this isn't a very tall vehicle, but they've really maximized interior space in here, and it's fantastic. The way they did that is the wheelbase. They pulled the front wheels forward and the rear wheels further back. There aren't any constraints with an electric car as a gas-powered car, and that allows them to provide more interior space, and it really is huge back here, especially for the size of the vehicle. But anyway, aside from space back here, a couple of other interesting quirks worth pointing out. For one thing, the rear seats continue the funkiness from up front. You have the same Alcantara seat centers and white contrast stitching and kind of white accents on the side of the seat, giving it sort of that sporty feel, which looks and feels kind of cool back here. You also have a neat piece of funky design back here with the speakers. Now up front, the speaker cover is this aluminum piece that has all these triangles, and they sort of fade out as you get near the edges of the speaker cover. Fine. In back, that design is integrated near the door handle, which looks even cooler. You can see it's black glossy instead of aluminum, but it still looks very cool and kind of funky and interesting, like you'd expect for the futuristic electric car. Also interesting back here is the USB port situation. You have 2 USB-C ports, one on each side, and they're integrated into the backs of the front seats, sort of the side backs, as you can see here. Kind of a cool little stealth integration for those USB ports, and it puts them higher up than what you usually find in most cars, where those ports are near the bottom. Putting it here makes it easier to put a device on your lap or pin it to the back of the seat if you have kids who want to watch on an iPad. One disappointment back here, though, is no rear climate controls. You do have rear climate vents. You can see them here on the B-pillars in the back, but you don't have climate controls, which is kind of okay, but not exactly great at this price point. High 40s, low 50s. That's where you want to start to see climate controls, and it would be nice to see in this car, but doesn't have them. And next up, we move on to another rather interesting aspect of the Kia EV6, and that would be the exterior styling, which you can see is rather futuristic and kind of cool and special, although frankly EVs are doing so many bizarre things with exterior design. This one seems relatively tame by comparison. But probably the most distinctive design element in this entire car is back here, this rear line, which you can see is the light bar in the back, but then it kind of swoops down the side of the car where it's the turn signal, as you can see here, and then it's a fantastic integration of the government-mandated red rear side reflector, and then this line actually goes through the rear wheel and kind of continues down the bottom side of the car where it becomes the lower line on the body. It's a very, very distinctive look for the EV6 and certainly sets it apart from others. Now, the rear line component of this does look a lot like the Aston Martin DBX, which you can see here, but the EV6 takes things quite a bit further by pushing this line basically down the entire side of the car as well. But while this line on the back and sides of the EV6 is very notable, there are some other noteworthy items on the outside. For instance, this narrow front grille, as you can see, with a distinctive LED light pattern that looks different from everything else. You also have this rather large windshield, as you can see, but then the side profile kind of tapers the windows down to the very back where they come to a little point in the very rear of the car. Kind of a distinctive look, common to some electric cars. Back here you have a very large rear spoiler above the rear window, which is kind of fitting of the GT line performance version of this EV6. And in back you also have another interesting item, this trim, which is sort of chrome and has triangles on it, kind of set apart from your usual bright work on the sides or rear of cars. But anyway, since I'm back here, time to open up the tailgate of this K backwards N. Okay, anyway, opening up the tailgate and into the cargo area. Now you can see when you get into this cargo area, it is quite large. The floor is very, very big, especially for a compact crossover sized vehicle, decent cargo space, but the sloping roofline really does rob you of vertical cargo space here. If you want to put like a large box or something, you might have trouble fitting it. Fortunately, the load floor here can be removed. You can just pull it off and then you get a few extra inches of vertical space, which is a nice touch. Or you can keep the load floor in place and just lift up this front part and you have a little compartment underneath the cargo area, which is also nice to have. Also worth noting, in this cargo area you do have these latches on the side which drop the rear seats. You pull on it and it releases the rear seats so you can drop them from back here rather than having to go around to the seats individually and put them down, which is also a nice touch. Now, another interesting item in the rear of the EV6 is the charge door, which is right here, very well integrated. You would never really know it's there, but it is. You tap on it and the charge door opens right up electronically, as you can see, and this is where you plug in the EV6 to charge it. If you want to close the charge door, just kind of lightly push it and it will do the rest electronically, closing the rest of the way. You can also open up the charge door with this little button here to the left of the steering wheel. You tap that and then the charge door opens, tap it again and the charge door closes. Pretty simple stuff, but that is your charger door, a nice little hidden integration in the EV6. But anyway, since I'm talking about opening things, let's discuss opening the doors and unlocking the car. You can see right now the door handles are flush up against the car, and that means the EV6 is locked. When you walk up to the EV6 with the key in your pocket, the doors automatically unlock and the door handles pop out so you can grab them and climb inside. When you walk away, they automatically lock again and go back flush with the car. Or you can just do it on the key fob. You press the unlock button, the car unlocks and the door handles pop out so you can grab them and open up the door. Pretty simple, and of course press lock and then the car is locked and they go back flush again. A lot of EVs are doing this, and the EV6 does too. And by the way, speaking of the key fob, this car has one rather unusual feature that most cars don't, and that would be the ability to go forward or backward from the key fob. You can see these little buttons marked P with arrows pointing up and down. If you have the car locked and off and you press one of those buttons and hold it down, you can see the car will move automatically from the key fob. I'm holding the key, I'm not in the car, I'm not pressing anything, the car is moving from the key fob, and you can move it the other direction as well by pressing the other arrow button. You can see I'm pressing it, and now the car is moving backwards, which is kind of a neat little quirk. I've shown this in other Hyundai and Kia models. People are always wondering why you would want this, and I guess the answer is if you're in a tight parking spot, you don't want to wedge yourself in the door, you can just move the car forward and climb in a lot easier. Probably not something too many people will use, but it's there. The ability to remote control, move the car car forward or backward at low speeds. And next up we move on to the front of the EV6. Now a lot of electric vehicles have a cargo area up here, and they make it very easy to access and very large. You can put stuff in here. Not quite the case in the EV6. For one thing, access is limited to this latch in the driver footwell, like you're opening up the hood in a gas-powered car. There's no like button on the key fob or easy button in the interior to open this up. But once you've unlatched it, you come around here and you can see this is what's under the hood. There's a lot of mechanical components, and then right in the center there's a plastic box marked EV. If you lift up the latch on that plastic box, you can see a storage area in here, but it is tremendously small. You do not have a lot of storage up front in the EV6. There is a little bit, but it's so little and so difficult to access that I suspect most people won't actually use this for storage. Now, aside from those quirks and features, I want to discuss two other interesting items with the EV6. One is powertrains. Now, the EV6 shares its powertrains with the Hyundai Ioniq 5. Like I said, this is based on the Ioniq 5. They share a lot of the same architecture, and they also share powertrains. That means the EV6 comes standard with 167 horsepower and rear-wheel drive. Or you can upgrade to about 225 horsepower and rear-wheel drive. That's the longest range model of this car. It gets about 310 miles of range. Now, this is the sportier version. It has all-wheel drive at about 320 horsepower, and range is about 275 miles. But as sporty as 320 horsepower is in a car this size, and that is pretty good, there is a sportier version coming. The EV6 GT will have almost 600 horsepower, which I suspect will lead to some great performance numbers, and I can't wait to check that out whenever it arrives in the next year or two. As for the other EV6 models, they go on sale early in 2022, in the next month or two, and pricing hasn't yet been announced. Although, based on Ioniq 5 pricing, I figure this will start in the mid $40,000 range. This one, like I've been saying, is probably in the high 40s to low 50s, which puts it in decent competition with other electric vehicles at this price, performance, and equipment level. And so those are the quirks and features of the new Kia EV6. Now it's time to get it out on the road and see how it drives. All right, driving the EV6 GT line. Now, I'm really excited to drive the EV6 GT, which is like the high performance version of this car, which is coming, I don't know, maybe a year from now. But even this one at 184 inches long, CRV length with 320 horsepower, that is pretty strong. So you floor it, whoo! It's pretty quick. Now, it's not as quick as a 320 horsepower CRV would be, and that's because it weighs a lot. This is about 4,500 pounds, which is a big number for like a little crossover. I think a CRV is probably like 3,800, 39, but all these batteries, well, they weigh. And so this car is a little heavier than you might expect given its size. But anyway, I do have to say there is a lot to like in terms of the driving experience in here. For one thing, very quiet, like all EVs. Obviously no engine note that you're contending with when you're driving around, but it does a good job of muting the outside world. Some of the lesser expensive EVs, more affordable ones, you can hear a lot actually, because when you don't have the sound of an engine to kind of mask what's going on around you, you end up hearing more tire, more wind, more other cars. Not the case in here. It feels very quiet and very nice. Now, as for actual driving and performance, it's pretty good. 0 to 60, I'm not exactly sure what the time is, but it feels quick. And more importantly, the steering and handling is excellent. I'm quite surprised by it, actually. I really enjoy the steering and handling feel in this vehicle. It's not incredibly ultra fast or precise. The steering is good. It's reasonably precise. It's reasonably quick to turn, but it's not like some ultra high performance car. Now, again, this is the GT line model, so it's sort of a sportier version. It's at the top of the range right now, although it'll be at the middle of the range when the GT comes out. The base models, I'm not exactly sure if they'll feel like this, but this one does. Now, in terms of visibility, it's actually surprisingly good in this car, despite the appearance of this car. It looks kind of like one of those thin window line cars you can't really see out of all that well, but you do have very large side mirrors. You have those wonderful blind spot cameras in the gauge cluster, and you can see decently outside the back. Plus, there's a huge steeply raked windshield, and you have a pretty good commanding view side to side. This car is a really interesting use of space, like I mentioned before, and that's true in the driving position as well. You sit higher than you would expect, considering that it's relatively easy to get in and out. I don't know how Kia and Hyundai have managed to do it with this and the Ioniq 5, but this feels like a crossover, but also a car, but in the best ways. And it feels large, but also small in the best ways too. It's small when you're maneuvering it, but large on the inside. It feels like a crossover from a seating position perspective, but like a car when you're climbing in. It's a really, really good and clever use of space of this car, and I think that's something that a lot of people are gonna like. Really, I think there's a lot to like in this car. It isn't quite as sporty as I was expecting. One of the reasons that I was really, really excited to review the EV6 is because I was looking for something like sporty and fast and fun, because I remember my Kia Stinger, which I owned, was like that, and I was kind of hoping for this to be an SUV version of that, just electric. This is fast and fun and it's exciting, but it doesn't quite handle like that. It doesn't quite steer like that. It's good, but not amazing, and so I'm excited to see the GT model when it comes out and see how that does. But it is strong, it does perform well, it's fun to drive and exciting, certainly more fun than the Volkswagen ID4. Kind of gives me Mach-E vibes in terms of its driving excitement. All cars seem to have some foibles with their technology, whatever. This one has a little more than most and a little more than I'd expect in a car that's kind of pitching itself as futuristic and high-tech, but it's still very usable and very easy, and I think that most people are going to find that they'll get used to it, and the other benefits of this car outweigh some of the small drawbacks of the tech. And so that's the 2022 Kia EV6. I've been looking forward to checking this out, and I'm thrilled that I had the chance. It's attractive and reasonably sporty, and it has good tech, and it looks like a pretty solid entry in the increasingly popular electric crossover world. And now it's time to give the EV6 a DOUGSCORE. And the DOUGSCORE is here, 63 out of 100, which places the EV6 here against rivals. It's a pretty impressive spot, ahead of the regular Tesla Model 3 and popular competitors like the Toyota RAV4 Prime and the Volkswagen ID4. But the EV6 can't quite beat out my two favorite smaller electric crossovers, the Ford Mustang Mach-E and the Tesla Model Y Performance. The EV6 is a lot cheaper than the Model Y Performance, so that one makes sense, but it's a close competitor to the Mach-E. In the end, though, the Mustang is just a little bit more fun, a little quicker, a little sharper, and a little more exciting. But both the Mach-E and the EV6 are excellent contenders in this increasingly popular segment.